Some scars never completely disappear, but they remind us of the strength we didn't know we had. This is the story of a woman who transformed tears into determination when everything she had built crumbled. My name is Jane Olivia Sanders. I'm 83 years old today, but my story begins when I was only 19. I was born in Springfield, Illinois, in a simple, hard-working family. My father was a truck driver and my mother a seamstress. We were 5 siblings, and I was the only girl. I learned early on to fight for my space. Before I continue, comment where you're watching this story from. Also, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. It helps this channel a lot. It was 1956. The radio played songs by Patti Page and Perry Como, and America was breathing the air of prosperity with President Eisenhower promising economic growth and stability. For a young woman from a small town like me, the future seemed full of possibilities, despite all the limitations women faced in those days. I worked as a clerk at Johnson's Pharmacy in the town square. That's where I met William. He walked in on a muggy January afternoon, wearing an impeccable suit despite the heat, asking for headache medicine. William Richards was a bank employee recently transferred from Chicago. At 27, with a way of talking that made my knees weak, he asked, "Does the young lady also have medicine for a racing heart?" After I handed him the aspirin, I blushed like a tomato, but accepted his invitation for coffee after my shift. My father, a strict man like fathers were in those days, was very reluctant when William asked permission to court me. "City men are no good," he would say. But William had a way of convincing people, of making them trust him. Within 6 months, even my father was charmed. Our courtship was quick, as was customary at that time. In December 1956, we married at the First Presbyterian Church. I remember my white dress, sewn by my mother and aunts, 3 months of work in lace and satin. The black and white photographs don't show it, but my bouquet was of daisies and white roses. William was as elegant as always, and I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. In the early years, we lived in a rented house near downtown. It wasn't large, but to me, it was a palace. I took care of it with all my love, embroidering tablecloths, planting geraniums in the small yard. William was promoted to assistant manager at the bank and said we would soon own our own home. In 1958, our first daughter, Marianne, was born. Seeing William holding that tiny creature with tears in his eyes made me believe our happiness would only grow. Sundays were special days. We would go to church in the morning, then have lunch with my parents or with William's aunt, his only relative in town. In the afternoon, we'd stroll in the park, William pushing Marianne's carriage, and people would greet us. "What a beautiful family," they would say, and I would swell with pride. Sometimes we would go to the movies to see films with Humphrey Bogart, and I dreamed of being as elegant as Audrey Hepburn. In 1960, I became pregnant again. The pregnancy was more difficult than the first. I had to rest during the last months. That's when I noticed the first changes in William. He would come home late, saying it was work at the bank, the responsibilities of a manager. I believed him, of course. Why would I doubt? He would bring flowers occasionally, chocolates for Marianne, and apologize for being late. Elizabeth was born in March 1961 on a rainy night. The delivery was complicated. I was hospitalized for a week. William would appear only during visiting hours, always in a hurry. "The bank is crazy, Jane. With this inflation, everyone wanting to withdraw money." I understood, or thought I understood. I had 2 small children now, and all my energy went to them. When I returned home with Elizabeth, something seemed different. William was more distant, impatient with the babies crying, irritated by Marianne's questions. She was almost 3 and wanted her father's attention. On nights when he came home late, the scent of different perfume wasn't always disguised by the quick shower he took. I swallowed my tears and doubts. After all, what could I do? I was a woman with no profession, with 2 small children, completely dependent on my husband. It was Mrs. Wilson, our neighbor, who first alerted me. "Jane, you're a decent girl. You don't deserve this." I pretended not to understand, but she insisted. "William has been seen with Carol, that new employee at the bank, at the country club, at the Pine restaurant." I defended William, said they were work commitments. "Work commitments don't end with kisses in the parking lot, child. she responded with the wisdom of her 60 years. That night I didn't sleep. I lay looking at the ceiling, listening to William's breathing beside me, feeling an abyss opening between us. The next morning, as he got ready for work, I casually asked about Carol. He froze for a second, but quickly regained his composure. She's a competent employee, works in the foreign exchange department. Why? I shrugged, said I had heard the name. He kissed me distractedly and left as if it were any other day. But it wasn't any other day. It was the day the seed of distrust had been planted, and it would grow too quickly. I began to notice other signs, the calls he received and went to answer far from me, the shirts with lipstick marks he tried to hide, the weekends he needed to work at the bank. In July that year, Marianne got very sick, high fever, rashes all over her body. The doctor diagnosed measles, but the complications were serious. She had to be hospitalized with pneumonia. I stayed at the hospital day and night, torn between worrying about Marianne in the hospital and Elizabeth, whom I left with my mother. William would appear, of course, but never stayed long. The bank, Jane, you know how it is. It was on the third night of Marianne's hospitalization, when her fever finally began to subside, that I decided to call the bank. It was late, almost 9 p.m., but William had said he would be there closing the monthly balance. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but Mr. Richards left at 6 p.m. as usual," informed the doorman. That night, sitting next to the hospital bed where my 3-year-old daughter was fighting pneumonia, I cried silently, not just for Marianne's illness, but for realizing that the sandcastle I believed was my marriage was crumbling. Where was William? With whom? Why lie when our daughter was sick? Marianne was discharged after a week, still weak but out of danger. William seemed relieved, and for a few days was the attentive father and husband I had known. But soon, the delays and excuses returned. I kept quiet, swallowed my tears, took care of the girls. What else could I do? Divorce was the forbidden word at that time. It meant scandal, shame for the family. And how would I support my daughters? In December 1961, William announced he had bought a house for us in the new neighborhood being built for bank employees. It was a nice house, bigger than the one we were renting, with a large yard for the girls to play in. I should have been happy, but something inside me was broken. We moved in January 1962, and the neighbors threw a small welcome party. I smiled, thanked them, pretended we were the perfect family everyone saw. The new house came with bitter revelations. I found receipts for expensive dinners, for gifts I never saw. A gold brooch, a French perfume. In a drawer in the study, I found a photo of William and a young, beautiful woman, embracing in front of a waterfall. Turning the photo over, I read, "Forever yours, Carol." The date? July 1961, exactly when Marianne was in the hospital. I confronted William that night. First, he denied it. Then, irritated that I had gone through his things, he admitted the affair with Carol but said it meant nothing. "You're always busy with the children, Jane. A man has his needs." I was shocked by his coldness, by the way he transformed his betrayal into my fault. It was that night I realized William wasn't just an unfaithful husband. He was a manipulator. He began to say I was getting ugly and sloppy, that any man would seek comfort outside the home, that I should be grateful he still supported me for giving a roof to the children, that without him I would be nothing. And the worst part, I began to believe it. The following months were of slow degradation. William no longer bothered to hide the affair with Carol. He would come home in the wee hours, when he came at all, happy or drunk, sad or irritated. I never knew which version of him I would find. The girls felt the tension. Marianne had nightmares. Elizabeth cried for no apparent reason. In August 1962, I learned from a bank colleague that Carol was pregnant. The world crashed down on my head that day. When William arrived, I had already packed his bags. "You can go live your other life now," I said, with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. He didn't deny Carol's pregnancy. He just laughed, a cruel laugh I'll never forget, and said, "And what are you going to do, Jane? How will you support these children? Who will want an old woman like you?" I was 25 at the time. Not old, but I felt 100 years old, carrying the weight of a failed marriage, shattered dreams, an uncertain future. William left that night, taking only a few belongings. "You'll beg me to come back," were his last words. The year 1962 was ending, and with it the 6 years of a marriage that began as a fairy tale and ended as a nightmare. I was alone with 2 small children to raise, with no profession, no money of my own, in a town where being a divorced woman meant being branded for life. But something inside me, a strength I didn't know I had, told me we would survive. That this wasn't the end, but the beginning of a new story I needed to write. Not for me, but for Marianne and Elizabeth. And so, with fear, but also with a determination born of pain, I closed the door of the house William had bought that August night in 1962. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that whatever it was, we would face it together, my daughters and I. What I didn't imagine was how painful this path would be, and how much more William would do to try to destroy us. I thought expelling William from the house would be the end of my suffering. But I was wrong. It was just the beginning of a battle I didn't know I would have the strength to fight. The morning after our separation, I woke to loud knocks on the door. It was Mrs. Wilson, my neighbor, with wide eyes. "Jane, you need to see this." She handed me a newspaper. There it was, in the business section, a small note. "William Richards takes position as general manager at the Central Branch of First National Bank." The photo showed my husband, or ex-husband, I wasn't sure what we were legally, smiling next to other men in suits. "Did you know about this?" Mrs. Wilson asked. No, I didn't know. William had never mentioned any promotion. Maybe it was a surprise, I thought for a moment. Then I realized the truth. He was planning a new life away from me, and possibly with Carol. A week passed without news from him. The savings I had kept in a cookie tin, money I had saved from what William gave me for household expenses, were beginning to dwindle. Marianne asked about her father every day, and Elizabeth, even so young, seemed to feel his absence, crying more than usual. That's when I received the notice to vacate the house. The bank was the true owner, and William, as an employee, only had the right to use it while working there. With his transfer to the Central Branch, we lost the right to housing. We had 30 days to leave. That night, I cried until I had no more tears. The next day, I got dressed as best I could and went to the bank, determined to talk to William. The security guard at the door blocked me. Mr. Richards left express orders not to be bothered by family. Ah, family. As if I were a distant aunt, an inconvenient cousin, not the woman who had given him 2 daughters, who had taken care of his house, his clothes, his life for 6 years. On the street, I crossed paths with Carol. I had never seen her in person, but I recognized her from the photo. She was radiant, her pregnancy belly showing under an elegant dress. She walked past me without knowing who I was, talking animatedly with another girl. "The doctor said it's a boy," I heard her say. A boy. William had always wanted a son. I returned home devastated. No place to live, no money, no future. That's when I found my mother at the door, worried because I hadn't shown up for Sunday lunch at her house. I collapsed in her arms, telling her everything. My mother, a simple but wise woman, hugged me for a long time and then said, "Daughter, you have 2 choices. Keep crying for the life you lost, or build a new life for you and your girls." The next morning, I left the children with my mother and went to the town registry office. I discovered that William had registered the house in his name only. Legally, I had no right to anything. At the courthouse, a lawyer informed me that I could try an action for abandonment, but the process would be long, and with William being a respected bank employee, my chances were slim. I had no choice but to accept my parents' offer to move back in with them temporarily. My father, despite his rigidity, surprised me with his understanding. "That scoundrel never fooled me," was all he said, but he prepared the old sewing room for me and the girls. The shame was almost as painful as the abandonment. In the streets, I felt the looks, heard the whispers. "That's Jane, the one whose husband traded her for the bank girl." Marianne, at 4 years old, came back from a friend's house crying because the girl's mother wouldn't let them play together. "Aunt Nancy said you're not married to Daddy anymore, and that's a sin," sobbed my daughter. How do you explain to a child that the sin wasn't in me? The money ran out in November. My parents did what they could, but my father, already with fragile health, earned little as a driver. That's when Mrs. Wilson appeared with a proposal. Her sister owned a boarding house for working women and students downtown and needed someone to help with the cooking and cleaning. The pay was little, but it included housing for me and the girls in a small room at the back. I accepted immediately. I had never worked in a kitchen before, but I learned quickly. I would wake up at 5 a.m. to prepare breakfast for the boarders, clean the rooms while they went to work or study, wash piles of clothes, prepare lunch and dinner. My once cared-for hands cracked with soap. My skin, which William used to praise for its delicacy, burned at the wood stove. But I had a roof, food for my daughters, and slowly, I was regaining my dignity. In March 1963, I learned from a boarder who worked on the same street as the bank that William and Carol had gotten married. Their son was born in January, a boy named Richard. I cried alone that night, not out of sadness for the loss of William, but for knowing he was forming a new family while abandoning the old one. It was during this time that Marianne began having problems at school. Always a good student, she became quiet and withdrawn. The teacher called me, concerned. "She needs her father," she said, as if I could materialize William in the girl's life. I tried to explain the situation, but the woman, single and childless, merely said that in the absence of the father, it's up to the mother to be strong. And I tried to be strong. During the day, I worked tirelessly at the boarding house. At night, I sewed for extra income, using the old singer my mother had lent me, simple dresses, hems, repairs, anything to supplement the income. In the early hours, when exhaustion took over, I dreamed of William. Sometimes they were nightmares where he took my daughters away. Other times, they were sweet dreams of reconciliation, the worst as they left me empty upon waking. In July 1963, I received a letter. It was from William, the first communication since he had left home. My heart raced, thinking of an apology, a chance to start over. But the content was cold, sent by his lawyer. He requested a divorce, which didn't officially exist in Illinois, but we could have a legal separation, and offered a symbolic alimony for the girls, an amount that would barely cover a week of expenses. At the end of the letter, a veiled threat. If I didn't accept the terms, he would use his influence to get custody of the girls, claiming I didn't have the conditions to raise them properly. "After all," the letter said, "you live in the back of a boarding house and work as a maid, while I can offer a home of our own and quality education." I broke into 1,000 pieces reading those words. How could he be so cruel? Threatening to take away my daughters? Using his position to intimidate me? Marianne and Elizabeth were all I had left. My only reason to get up every morning and face the hardness of life. I sought a lawyer, Mr. Emanuel, an elderly gentleman who agreed to help me, charging almost nothing. "I have a daughter your age," he explained. "I can't see an injustice like this without doing something." He responded to William's letter with simple terms. I would accept the divorce, but would demand fair alimony for the girls based on William's current salary, and would not give up custody under any circumstances. The response came 2 weeks later. William agreed to pay higher alimony, but wanted bi-weekly visits with the girls. Mr. Emanuel advised me to accept. "It's the children's right to spend time with their father, Mrs. Sanders," he said gently. Reluctantly, I agreed. The first visit was scheduled for a Sunday in September. I dressed the girls in their best clothes, few, mended, but clean and pressed. Marianne was anxious, talking non-stop about everything she would tell her father. Elizabeth, just over 2 years old, barely remembered him but absorbed her sister's excitement. We waited in the central square as agreed. 1 hour, 2 hours. The sun began to set. Marianne, tired of playing on the benches in the square, asked every minute, "Is Daddy coming yet, Mommy?" The church clock struck 6, and William didn't show up. We returned to the boarding house, Marianne crying silently, Elizabeth asleep in my arms. That night, lying in the narrow bed I shared with the girls, I made a promise to myself. I would never again allow William to hurt my daughters that way. If he didn't want to be a father, I wouldn't force him. Marianne and Elizabeth would have only me, but I would be enough. I had to be. The following months were ones of adaptation. The boarding house prospered, and Mrs. Matthews, the owner, increased my salary. I started taking evening courses in cutting and sewing at the technical school, leaving the girls with one of the boarders, a pedagogy student who loved children. In the spring of 1964, while the country experienced the turbulence of the civil rights movement, my little personal revolution was advancing silently. I learned to live without expecting anything from William, to count only on my work and on the support network I had formed, my parents, the boarders who had become friends, Mrs. Matthews, who was almost a second mother. The child support rarely arrived on time. Sometimes it didn't come at all. When I complained to William's lawyer, I heard that he was having temporary difficulties despite the important position he held. I stopped counting on that money and intensified my sewing work. The clothes I made began to gain fame in the neighborhood, especially party dresses and children's clothes. In January 1965, Marianne began to show strange symptoms: headaches, vomiting, intermittent fever. The doctor at the health clinic diagnosed stress. "Children suffer too," he explained. "Your daughter is carrying many worries for someone so young." I tried to create a lighter environment, telling cheerful stories before bed, taking them to the park on Sundays, organizing small parties with other children in the neighborhood. But the shadow of William's absence loomed, especially when Marianne saw her friends' fathers picking them up from school or playing in the park. It was during this time that Mrs. Matthews became seriously ill. "Cancer," the doctor said, already in an advanced stage. I took over all the administration of the boarding house while she underwent treatment. I worked from dawn until late at night, divided between the kitchen, cleaning, accounts, shopping, my daughters, my sewing, and hospital visits. In March, Mrs. Matthews called me to the hospital. Weak, she held my hand and said, "Jane, you were an angel who appeared in my life. I never had children, you know. I would like you to have the boarding house when I'm gone." I protested, crying, saying she would get better, but we both knew the truth. Mrs. Matthews passed away in April. In her will, she left me the boarding house with the condition that I keep the name Meadow House and continue to welcome working women. At 28, I became the owner of a small business. The boarders celebrated. They were afraid that Mrs. Matthews' nephew, her only living relative, would transform the place into something else. That same month, William appeared unexpectedly at the boarding house. He was thinner, with deep circles under his eyes. For a moment, my foolish heart quickened. Then he spoke. "I came to see the girls. I heard you're now the owner of this place." There was something in his voice, envy, resentment, I couldn't decipher. Marianne refused to talk to him. She hid behind me, her eyes full of hurt. "You never came before," was all she said. Elizabeth, who barely remembered her father, hid her face in my apron. William stayed for only 10 minutes, uncomfortable, and left saying he would return soon. He never did. Later, I learned from a former boarder who worked near the bank that William had been fired for irregularities in the accounts. Carol had abandoned him, taking their son Richard. They said he drank a lot. I felt no joy at this news, only a deep compassion for Richard, who would now live through the same abandonment as my daughters, and perhaps deep down, a slight feeling of justice being done, not by me, but by the universe. The year 1965 was closing with significant changes in my life. From abandoned wife to sole entrepreneur, from desperate woman to mother determined to give a better future to her daughters. The pain hadn't completely disappeared, I doubt it ever would, but now it shared space with hope, a hope born not of romantic dreams, but of the hard and comforting certainty that I was capable of surviving, of rebuilding, of prospering despite everything and everyone. And it was with that certainty that I looked at Marianne and Elizabeth on Christmas night of 1965, around the small tree we had set up in the boarding house living room, along with the women who lived there and who had become our extended family. "Mom," asked Marianne, "are you happy?" I hugged my daughters and answered sincerely, "Yes, my child, I'm happy that we have each other." What I didn't know was that life still had twists and turns reserved for us, and that William would cross our path once more in the most painful way possible. Meadow House became more than my support. It was my rebirth. Those worn walls witnessed my transformation from abandoned wife to independent woman. 3 years had passed since William left, leaving a trail of pain that was slowly dissipating. 1966 began with changes. The boarding house, once a modest business, was thriving. The 8 vacancies were always filled with a waiting list, beginning teachers, shop clerks, students, women working, something still viewed with reservations at that time. I transformed the old storage room into 2 more rooms and hired Aurora, a widowed lady, to help in the kitchen. Marianne, now 8, had become a serious and studious girl. The hurt from her father's abandonment manifested in sudden silences, in distant looks. Elizabeth, at 5, remembered little of William, asking less about him each passing year. "Other girls have a father. Why don't we?" she questioned once. I replied that families come in many formats, and ours was small but full of love. William's child support stopped coming completely in March that year. Mr. Emanuel tried to contact him, but discovered he had moved from Springfield without leaving an address. "Better to forget," the old lawyer advised me. "You've proven yourself capable of raising your daughters alone." At Easter, I inaugurated a new venture, the sewing atelier annexed to the boarding house. My dresses had gained fame beyond the neighborhood. There were orders from women in local society. I hired 2 young women to help, girls from the suburbs who had talent with the needle but few opportunities. "You're different, Mrs. Sanders," Lucia, one of them, told me after a month working with me. "How so?" I asked. "You went down and came back up. Most women just fall." Those words touched me deeply. How many women like me, abandoned, betrayed, couldn't rise again? I began to accept some apprentices without charging, young single mothers or widows without a profession. "Give a fish and teach to fish," my mother would say, quoting an old proverb. In July, I received an unexpected visit. Helena, William's former colleague at the bank, now transferred to Chicago. "I don't know if I should tell you," she hesitated, having coffee in the boarding house kitchen after the girls went to sleep, "but I think you have the right to know. Carol had abandoned William a year earlier, taking Richard, then 2 years old. The reason? She had discovered other lovers, several junior female employees at the bank. William began to drink heavily, missing work until he was fired for diverting money from client accounts. He's in Chicago now, working as an insurance salesman. I heard he lives in a boarding house room in the Loop. I felt a mixture of compassion and vindication. The man who had humiliated me, who had threatened to take my daughters, claiming I didn't have the conditions, now lived in a situation similar to what he had imposed on me. "And Richard?" I asked. "Carol remarried to a businessman. From what I know, the stepfather registered the boy as his son." That night, contemplating the ceiling of my room, I reflected on the cycles of life. William, who had so despised my work at the boarding house, now lived in one probably less welcoming than mine. His plans for a perfect family with Carol had crumbled, while I had built a small empire, the thriving boarding house, the expanding sewing atelier, my daughters growing healthy. The year 1967 brought new challenges. The rampant inflation of the era corroded earnings, forcing me to constantly readjust the prices of the boarding house and the atelier. Many boarders had difficulty paying. I created a barter system. Some gave private lessons to Marianne and Elizabeth, others helped with administration or domestic tasks. It was a boarder, Teresa, an accounting student, who suggested formalizing what was already happening in practice, transforming Meadow House into a cooperative. Each resident contributes what she can, money or work. You remain the owner, but share the responsibilities. The idea prospered. Soon, Meadow House became known not only as housing for working women, but as a space of mutual support, of female solidarity in an era when independent women were viewed with suspicion. We created our own community. The atelier also grew. Beyond dresses and made-to-measure clothes, we began to produce a small line of ready-made pieces sold in 2 downtown stores. I hired more seamstresses, all women in vulnerable situations, many with stories similar to mine. In September, a disturbing incident. Elizabeth, returning from school, was approached by a man who said he was her father. Frightened, the girl ran into the boarding house. When I arrived from the atelier, I found her crying in Aurora's arms. "It was Mr. William indeed," confirmed a neighbor. "He was agitated, seemed drunk." The next morning, I went to the police station. The sheriff, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, listened to me impatiently. "Mrs. Sanders, I can't prevent a father from seeing his own daughter? I explained that William hadn't sought the girls for years, that he had appeared drunk, that Elizabeth barely recognized him. Even so, it's his right. You should be grateful he's still interested. I left the sheriff's office indignant. His right? And what about my daughter's rights not to be frightened, not to have a drunk stranger suddenly appearing in their lives? I realized, not for the first time, how society favored men, even those who abandoned their responsibilities. As a precaution, I hired Joseph, Aurora's brother, to pick up the girls from school. He was a gentle man who had lost his wife in childbirth and was raising his son, Anthony, Elizabeth's age, alone. We became friends, sharing the challenges of raising children without a partner, although our situations were quite different. He, a widower, respected, me divorced, stigmatized. Weeks later, at the Sunday market, I crossed paths with William. He was unrecognizable, thin, disheveled, yellow eyes. He made a motion to approach, but Joseph, who was accompanying us, stood in front of me. William walked away, staggering. "Do you know that man?" Joseph asked afterward. "He's the father of my daughters," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat, not out of love or longing, but at the sight of human decay, of the waste of a life. "He's not well," commented Joseph, with the compassion characteristic of those who have already suffered. "Worry about your daughters and yourself, Jane. Some people don't want to be saved." Those words stayed with me for years. I had blamed myself for the failure of the marriage, questioned what I could have done differently. Now I clearly saw, William had made his choices, and I had made mine. He had chosen the path of betrayal, of escaping responsibilities. I had chosen to face reality, to rebuild, to move forward. In December, during the Meadow House Christmas party, Joseph asked me to marry him. It was discreet, a private moment in the back garden while the children played and the boarders sang Christmas carols. "You don't need to answer now," he said, gentle as always. "I know you carry deep scars." That night, contemplating my sleeping daughters, I reflected on the proposal. Joseph was a good man, hard-working, loving with his son, and kind to Marianne and Elizabeth. Marriage would mean security, a complete family for my daughters, a companion for me. But it would also mean giving up the hard-won independence, the freedom to make my own decisions. On Christmas morning, I gave my answer. "I need more time, Joseph. It's not you. It's my scars. And also, I've conquered something precious, my autonomy. I don't know if I'm ready to share the reins of my life." He understood, without pressuring. We remained friends, our children growing up together, sharing Sundays in the park, occasional movies, family dinners. It was an arrangement that worked for everyone. 1968 brought political turbulence to the country. The Vietnam War and civil rights struggles intensified, creating a tense atmosphere nationwide. At the boarding house, we discreetly welcomed 2 students persecuted for participation in the student movement. "You could have problems," warned Teresa, now graduated in accounting and my assistant in the administration of the boarding house and the atelier. "These are dangerous times." "More dangerous is closing our eyes to injustice," I replied, remembering when no one welcomed me in my moment of greatest vulnerability. In March 1969, a tragedy struck us. William, completely drunk, caused an accident that resulted in the death of a young couple. He was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 6 years in prison. The news reached me through Helena, who maintained contact with former bank colleagues. "I thought you should know, to prepare the girls in case they hear comments." I decided to tell my daughters the truth, in a manner appropriate to the age of each. Marianne, at 11, listened in silence, her eyes fixed on the ground. "He chose this path, didn't he, Mom?" she finally asked. "Nobody forced him." Elizabeth, at 8, had fewer memories of her father, but still kept the idealized image she had created. "Will he get better in prison? Will he regret it?" I hugged her, feeling her small body tremble. "I don't know, my love. We can only hope he finds himself." That night, Joseph appeared with a bouquet of daisies, my favorites. "I heard what happened. I came to see how you are." We talked at length on the porch, the children already asleep. We spoke about choices, consequences, the effect of our actions on others' lives, about William, who from a respected man in the community had become a prisoner, leaving a trail of pain in his path. People think divorce is the failure, I commented. But sometimes it's the salvation. If I had continued with William, maybe I would have been in the car that night. Maybe the girls would have been. Or we would have sunk with him in a toxic marriage. Joseph took my hand, a simple gesture of comfort, with no ulterior motives. You didn't just survive, Jane. You flourished. That's more than many people, men or women, achieve in an entire lifetime. The following months were of stability and growth. Meadow House continued to prosper with a waiting list. The atelier produced for 4 stores in the city and 2 in Chicago. I hired a lawyer to formalize the cooperative, and we were about to open a small restaurant on the ground floor, Aurora's idea, whose Southern cuisine was successful among the boarders. In October, I received a letter from the penitentiary. It was from William, written in trembling handwriting, very different from the firm strokes I had known. He asked to see his daughters, said he was sick, spoke of repentance and forgiveness. I sat in the garden, the letter in my hands, observing the roses I cultivated with care, the same ones that had once adorned my bridal bouquet. I showed the letter to Marianne and Elizabeth, respecting their right to decide. Do you want to see him? The choice is yours. I'll support any decision. Marianne, always more reserved, shook her head. I can't, Mom. Maybe someday, but not now. Elizabeth bit her lip, undecided. Can I think about it? I don't know what I feel. I responded to William, informing him of the girls' decision without judgment or resentment. They are people, not property. They have the right to process their feelings at their own pace. I ended the letter with a phrase that summarized my journey. I hope you find the peace that I found, William. There is always a path to redemption if we are willing to walk it. December arrived with festive airs. The boarding house, decorated for Christmas, was bustling with activity. The boarders, many unable to travel home due to distance or family circumstances, were preparing a special celebration. The newly opened restaurant was reserved for Christmas dinner. On the afternoon of the 24th, Joseph appeared with his son and an unexpected gift. 2 snow-white rabbit kits for Marianne and Elizabeth. Everyone deserves something alive to care for, he said, as the girls celebrated, ecstatic with the little animals. Observing that scene, my smiling daughters, the boarding house full of life, the thriving atelier, the restaurant that was beginning to attract clientele, I felt a deep gratitude for the life I had built from the ruins. It wasn't perfect. It had its difficulties, but it was authentic, conquered with hard work and determination. Joseph approached, holding a small box. It's not a marriage proposal, I promise. He smiled, noticing my expression. Just a Christmas memento. Inside was a delicate flower brooch worked in silver, for the owner of Meadow House, a woman who found beauty among the thorns. That night during dinner, I looked around the long table. My daughters, Joseph and Anthony, Aurora and her brother, the boarders, the seamstresses from the atelier who had no family in town. We were a diverse community, united not by blood ties, but by choice, by affection, by mutual respect. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the 19-year-old girl I once was, scared and dazzled by an elegant banker in an impeccable suit. That girl would never have imagined the journey life had in store for her. The deep falls, but also the unexpected flights, the thorns, yes, but mainly the flowers she managed to cultivate among them. The year 1969 was ending, taking with it a decade of transformations. The young clerk had become a businesswoman, a single mother, the pillar of a small community. The scars remained, but they no longer hurt as before. They were marks of battles won, silent witnesses to a strength I didn't even know I possessed until I was forced to discover it. What I didn't imagine was that the 1970s would bring new challenges and that the past would return in unexpected ways, testing once more my ability to forgive others and mainly myself. If you're enjoying my story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Now let's continue. The decade of the 1970s began with America experiencing economic challenges. The newspapers talked about recession. The black and white TV commercials showed smiling families. But this prosperity wasn't reaching everyone equally. At Meadow House, we felt the effects of inflation, the difficulties of keeping prices accessible for our boarders, teachers, secretaries, students, while costs rose steeply. It was a daily balancing act that required creativity and determination. In March 1970, Marianne turned 12. She was no longer the insecure child who cried for her father's absence. She had transformed into a serious, responsible preteen with a remarkable talent for numbers and administration. She would accompany me to the farmer's market on Sundays, negotiating prices with a skill that surprised even the most experienced vendors. "This girl has a knack for business," commented Mr. Jones from the butcher stall after Marianne secured a considerable discount on meat for the restaurant. "Takes after her mother." Those words filled me with pride. Marianne was my reflection in many aspects: the determination, the practicality, the sense of responsibility. But she also carried her own scars. Sometimes I would catch her watching other girls with their fathers, a distant look revealing the still open wound of abandonment. Elizabeth, at 9, was the opposite of her sister. Extroverted, artistic, always surrounded by friends. She had inherited my talent for sewing, creating little clothes for her dolls with scraps from the atelier. Unlike Marianne, she spoke openly about William, creating fantasies where her father returned regenerated, asking for forgiveness. "He's in prison now, isn't he, Mom? When he gets out, will he come see us?" she would ask frequently. I tried to balance truth with compassion, without feeding unrealistic hopes or completely destroying the paternal image. In May, I received a letter from William's lawyer. He had developed liver cirrhosis and was hospitalized in the prison hospital. His condition was serious. Given the circumstances, he requested house arrest and wanted to know if he could serve it under my supervision, since he had no close family. The letter fell like a bomb on my carefully reconstructed life. William again in our daily lives? The man who had abandoned his daughters, who had threatened to take my custody, who had plunged into alcoholism until causing the death of innocents? How would this affect Marianne, Elizabeth, the dynamics of the boarding house? Joseph, who had become my confidant, advised caution. "You've built a solid life, Jane. Don't allow him to destabilize you again." Teresa, more practical, suggested, "Offer financial assistance to host him elsewhere with a nurse. You have no obligation to have him under your roof." I consulted Marianne and Elizabeth, as I always did in important decisions. The reaction was divided, as expected. "He made his choices, Mom. Why should we bear the consequences?" questioned Marianne, with maturity beyond her years. Elizabeth, on the other hand, saw an opportunity. "He's sick, Mom. Maybe it's a chance to make peace." After days of reflection, I made my decision. I would write to the judge explaining that I couldn't receive William at the boarding house, but that I would rent a small apartment downtown, hire a nurse for basic care, and allow the daughters to visit him if they so wished. "Not for him," I explained to Joseph, "but for the girls, so they don't carry the weight of doubt." In June, before my proposal was even evaluated by the judge, I received the news. William had died in the prison hospital, advanced cirrhosis complicated by pneumonia. He had died alone, without family by his side. The news hit me in an unexpected way. There was no more love, but there had been once. There was no more hurt, but deep scars that suddenly seemed to pulse again. I cried silently in the garden, not for the William who had betrayed and abandoned me, but for the charming young man I met at the pharmacy, for the father that Marianne and Elizabeth never really had, for the life wasted in wrong choices. Telling the girls was the hardest part. Marianne received the news with apparent indifference, but at night I heard her crying softly in her room. When I entered, she was clutching an old photograph, the only one she had kept of her father, taken on her 3rd birthday. "I want to feel more," she sobbed. "But he's a stranger to me, Mom. A stranger who left me with a huge hole." Elizabeth collapsed in tears, her fantasy of reconciliation crumbling once and for all. "He'll never come back now, will he? He'll never take me to ride the carousel like Annie's dad does." The funeral was discreet, organized by me since William had left no other relatives. Only me, the girls, Joseph, the lawyer, and 2 former colleagues from the bank attended. Helena came from Chicago, bringing a simple bouquet. "I think you're the only person who really knew him," she told me. "William before, the real one." I pondered these words for a long time. Who was William really? The charming banker who had won me over? The attentive husband of the early years? The traitor? The alcoholic? The prisoner? Or a complex combination of all these, like all of us? Weeks after the funeral, I received another surprise. William's lawyer informed me that he had left a life insurance policy. The policy, made still in his bank days, had never been canceled. I was listed as the beneficiary along with the girls. It wasn't a fortune, but enough to ensure college for both of them, something I had always worried about. "A last decent gesture," commented Joseph when I told him. "Or perhaps an attempt at late redemption." That same month, a 17-year-old girl knocked on the door of the boarding house. Her name was Diana. She was 6 months pregnant, expelled from home by her parents. The painfully familiar story touched me. I offered her shelter, light work in the restaurant, and promised to help her after the birth. Diana's arrival generated some buzzing in the neighborhood. "Meadow House now accepts that kind of girl?" questioned Mrs. Elliott, the devout woman who was always criticizing our community of women without husbands. I ignored the comments. If there was something I had learned in my journey, it was that others' opinions don't pay bills or ease pain. Diana gave birth in November, a healthy boy named Gabriel. Against all expectations, her parents showed up at the hospital. The sight of their grandson softened her father's severe heart, who invited his daughter and the baby to return home. "But I want to work, Dad," insisted Diana. "Mrs. Sanders taught me that I can be a mother and still have my independence." We reached an agreement. Diana would return to live with her parents, but would continue working part-time at the restaurant and studying at night to finish high school. She had become one of my girls, as I came to call the young women I welcomed. Not just the boarders, but all those who found in Meadow House a space of welcome and growth. 1971 arrived with news. The restaurant was gaining fame beyond the boarding house, attracting outside customers. We decided to expand it, renovating the entire ground floor area. It was a risky investment that would consume years of savings, but Teresa did the calculations and guaranteed it would be worth it. During the renovation, Marianne showed herself especially involved. At 13, she followed the work daily, checking materials, questioning prices, suggesting modifications that would save money without compromising quality. "She's going to be an architect," commented the construction foreman, impressed. "No," corrected Marianne with the determination that characterized her. "I'm going to be a civil engineer." Engineering was a course practically exclusive to men at the time. When I cautiously commented on this, Marianne shrugged. "So what? You run a boarding house, a restaurant, and an atelier alone, Mom. You taught me that a woman can do anything." Those words were engraved in my heart. Among so many lessons I had tried to transmit to my daughters, this was perhaps the most important. Independence, confidence in one's own ability, the refusal to accept the limits imposed by society. The restaurant reopened in August, completely renovated, with capacity for 60 people. I officially named it Southern Comfort, in homage to Aurora and her Southern cuisine that now attracted customers from all over the city. We installed a luminous sign on the facade, my first advertisement, a luxury for the time. The inauguration was a success, with a line on the sidewalk. Joseph, who had accompanied the entire process, seemed almost as proud as I was. Our friendship had evolved into a peculiar relationship by the standards of the time. We didn't live together. We weren't married, but we shared dinners, Sunday walks, mutual support. The children considered themselves practically siblings. At social events, we introduced ourselves as good friends, although everyone knew it was more than that. "People talk, Jane," my mother warned me, concerned about my reputation. "Let them talk," I replied, smiling. "I'm 34. I have 2 thriving businesses and 2 wonderful daughters. Others' opinions are the least of my problems." At Christmas 1971, Joseph surprised me with a special gift: tickets to Miami. "You've never left Springfield. The girls need to see the ocean." It was an extravagance by our standards, but the children were euphoric. Marianne, always practical, was already talking about visiting museums and historical points. Elizabeth dreamed of the beach, the waves, the ice creams by the seaside. We traveled in January 1972, leaving Aurora and Teresa responsible for the boarding house and the restaurant. Being away from business was a luxury I rarely allowed myself, but Joseph insisted. "You've been working non-stop for 10 years, Jane. You deserve a rest." Miami was everything the magazines and television showed and more. The beautiful architecture, the Art Deco district, the beaches of South Beach and Key Biscayne. For small-town girls raised with simplicity, each experience was a wonder. Elizabeth froze before the sea, her eyes watering. "It's bigger than everything, Mom," she whispered. Marianne, more reserved, kept everything in her diary, mentally photographing every detail. Those 2 weeks in Miami transformed something in us. We returned renewed, with expanded horizons. Marianne, especially, returned determined to study more, to conquer a place at the university, to see more of the world beyond our city. Elizabeth brought a new passion: painting. During the trip, we visited a modern art exhibition, and the girl was fascinated by the colors, forms, possibilities. The year 1972 went by with stability in business. The restaurant prospered. The boarding house maintained its excellent reputation. The atelier received constant orders. Economically, we had never been so well. I was finally able to buy a small used car, but in good condition. Learning to drive at 35 was a challenge I faced with determination. If a man can do it, I can too, I repeated to myself as I dealt with clutch and gears. Joseph had the sensitivity not to offer help unless I asked for it. He knew how important my independence was. In the second half of the year, news shook our routine. Carol, William's ex-lover and then wife, had died in a car accident in Chicago. I learned through Helena, who maintained contact with former bank colleagues. The most disturbing part? Richard, William's son with Carol, now 11 years old, was being sent to an orphanage since the stepfather didn't wish to keep him. The news caused me a profound disquiet. The boy, half-brother to Marianne and Elizabeth, alone in the world. The son of the man who had betrayed me, who had abandoned our daughters, but still an innocent child. For days, the image of that boy I had never seen, but who carried the blood of my daughters, tormented me. "What are you thinking about, Jane?" Joseph asked one night, noticing my distraction during dinner. "I'm thinking about Richard, about how scared and confused he must be, about how unfair it is to pay for parents' mistakes." That night, after the girls were asleep, I had a long conversation with Joseph. I exposed my contradictory feelings, my impulse to do something for Richard, my fear of the complications this would bring. Joseph listened patiently, without judging. "You have the biggest heart I've ever known, Jane. If you feel you should do something, do it. I'll be by your side." I spoke with Marianne and Elizabeth the next morning. I explained about Richard, his kinship with them, his current situation. The reactions were mixed. Marianne, always more emotionally reserved, asked practical things: the boy's age, how we would reorganize the rooms, legal questions. Elizabeth, impulsive, was enchanted with the idea of a brother. "Can we get him today, Mom?" The decision was made. I activated lawyers, started the process to obtain custody of Richard. It wouldn't be easy. A divorced woman, with no direct ties to the boy, facing the bureaucracy of the state. But I had faced bigger challenges. During the process, we prepared space for Richard. We converted a small storage room into a bedroom, painted walls, bought simple but comfortable furniture. Marianne donated some books from her shelf. Elizabeth separated games and art materials. Anthony, Joseph's son, offered his old collection of toy cars. In December 1972, after months of legal procedures, we finally obtained temporary custody of Richard. Joseph accompanied me to Chicago to pick him up at the state orphanage, a gray, impersonal building in a downtown neighborhood. The boy we met was the image of William, the same brown eyes, the same determined chin. Thin, pale, with a distrustful look, he held a small suitcase with his few belongings. "Hello, Richard. I'm Jane, and this is Joseph. We've come to take you home. Are you a relative of my mother?" he asked, confused. How to explain our complicated kinship? I opted for the simplified truth. "No, dear, but you have 2 sisters who are my daughters. Your father was married to me before he met your mother." Richard's adaptation was gradual, full of challenges. Initially withdrawn, distrustful, he constantly tested limits, like any child who had gone through so many traumas and abandonments. Marianne maintained emotional distance, observing her half-brother with caution. Elizabeth, on the other hand, adopted him immediately, becoming his guide, protector, translator of the new world in which he found himself. In the first months of 1973, Richard had frequent nightmares. He would wake up screaming, calling for his mother. On these nights, I would hug him until he calmed down, singing the same lullabies that had cradled my daughters. Gradually, the nightmares diminished. In their place emerged a voracious interest in books. Richard discovered in reading a refuge, a way to process his emotions. "He has a brain just like Marianne's," commented Elizabeth one afternoon, observing her brother absorbed in an adventure book. "And a smile just like yours, Mom. When he finally smiles, it looks like you." Those words touched me deeply. Richard didn't carry my blood, but by welcoming him, I had offered him more than a roof. I had given him the chance of a new beginning, of an identity beyond the tragedy that had marked the beginning of his life. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of that tumultuous decade. Family isn't defined by blood or documents, but by daily choices of love and care. In July 1973, after a year of temporary custody, we finally received the news. Richard's permanent custody had been granted. To celebrate, we organized a special lunch at the restaurant, complete with cake and presents. "It's like a new birthday," explained Elizabeth to her brother. "The day you officially became part of our family." During the celebration, observing my two daughters and this new son that destiny had brought through tortuous paths, I recalled the naive young woman I once was, the clerk in love with the elegant banker, dreaming of the perfect life, the ideal marriage, the family and the models that society determined as correct. Real life had proved infinitely more complex, painful, surprising, and also richer, deeper. The scars we carried, Marianne, Elizabeth, Richard, and I, were not just marks of suffering but witnesses to our capacity to survive, to rebuild, to love again. That festive July afternoon, as Richard blew out the candle of his new birthday, I made a silent prayer of gratitude. Gratitude for the falls that taught me to rise, for the abandonments that forced me to find inner strength, for the closed doors that obliged me to build my own path, and for the flowers I had managed to cultivate among so many thorns. My daughters, my newly arrived son, my thriving businesses, my support community, my unconventional relationship with Joseph. What did the future hold? New struggles, certainly, challenges I hadn't even imagined yet. But also, and mainly, the certainty that I wouldn't walk alone, and that yesterday's scars would be the strength to face tomorrow. The first rays of 1974 found Meadow House in full transformation. What had begun as a simple shelter for working women had become a small complex. The boarding house on the upper floor, the Southern Comfort restaurant on the ground floor, and the sewing atelier at the back. On the exterior walls, flowering vines climbed vigorously, a perfect symbol of how life always finds a way through the cracks. Our America was experiencing the aftermath of Watergate, but in our small corner of the world, life continued with its particular rhythm. Marianne had turned 16, a serious young woman with penetrating eyes and sharp intelligence. She was taking advanced classes, determined to enter the engineering college. "I want to build things that last, Mom," she would say, as she devoured books of mathematics and physics. She no longer spoke about William. It was as if she had buried that part of her history along with her father. Elizabeth, at 13, was flourishing as an artist. Her paintings adorned the walls of the restaurant, drawing praise from customers. With a temperament opposite to her sister's, expansive, emotional, she spoke openly about her feelings. She still kept a small album with the few photos we had of William, occasionally looking at them with curiosity, as if observing a stranger. Richard, now 12, had adapted surprisingly well. The quiet, frightened boy from the orphanage had transformed into a vivacious child with the curious look of someone rediscovering the world. At school, he stood out in literature and history. At home, he had become Aurora's official assistant in the kitchen, learning the secrets of Southern cuisine. "He has a taste for seasoning," the old cook would comment proudly. "He knows when the beans need more garlic or when the sauce calls for a bay leaf. It's a gift, Mrs. Sanders." Our unconventional family had found its rhythm, its balance. Joseph and Anthony dined with us several times a week. We spent Sundays together in the park or at a friend's farm on the outskirts of town. Sometimes I noticed disapproving looks. The divorced woman, the widower, the children of different origins. But I no longer cared. We had built something precious, a space of acceptance, of genuine affection, of mutual respect. In April, the town was shaken by tragic news. A fire had destroyed the municipal orphanage, leaving 20 children homeless. Miraculously, there were no fatalities, but the old building was completely destroyed. "What will happen to them now?" asked Richard, visibly shaken, remembering his own passage through a similar institution. The answer emerged spontaneously, like many of the best decisions in my life. "We can welcome some," I suggested during dinner. "We have the large storage room at the back that we use only to store restaurant material. We can adapt it temporarily." Joseph's look met mine in that silent understanding we had developed over the years. "I can make the necessary renovations, install bathrooms," he offered. Marianne, always practical, was already making mental calculations. "We need beds, bed linens, closets." Elizabeth was vibrating with the idea. "I can give painting classes to them." Richard, quieter, just nodded, his eyes shining. "I'll show them it's different from the orphanage here. Here it's family." Thus was born what would later be called Flower Shelter, initially an emergency space for 5 children between 7 and 10 years old, 3 girls and 2 boys. The adaptation of the storage room was a joint effort. Joseph coordinated the structural part. The boarders donated furniture, clothes, toys. The restaurant customers, knowing of the initiative, contributed with donations. Aurora organized a team of volunteer cooks to increase meal production. "Do you think you can manage it?" asked the juvenile judge, visibly skeptical about my capacity to administer yet another responsibility. "I know I can," I replied without hesitation. "I have an entire community supporting me." The children arrived in May, frightened, carrying small bundles with their few belongings saved from the fire. Richard was fundamental at this moment. He knew exactly how they felt, the fear of the unknown, the longing for familiar faces, the fear of yet another abandonment. "Here no one yells at you," he explained to Joaquin, the youngest at just 7 years old. "And the food is the best in town." The first days were chaotic, adapting routines, understanding personalities, dealing with specific traumas. Anna, 9 years old, had nightmares about the fire. Peter, 10, constantly tested limits, as if expecting to be punished. The twins, Sophie and Claire, 8 years old, clung to each other, refusing to be separated even for minutes. Gradually, we established a dynamic. The children would attend the local public school. In the afternoons, we took turns, helping them with lessons and offering activities. Marianne taught mathematics, Elizabeth art. Richard organized reading sessions. Anthony, Joseph's son, played football with the boys in the small yard. The older-aged boarders, many of them teachers, offered school reinforcement. What began as a temporary solution extended when the orphanage was rebuilt 3 months later. The children didn't want to return. "We've never had a place like this," explained Sophie, the more articulate of the twins. The judge, witnessing the progress made, granted us provisional custody, with regular visits from social workers for evaluation. In July, I received an unexpected proposal. The Municipal Department of Social Assistance offered a small monthly subsidy to formalize our shelter, recognizing its role in the community. "We don't want to institutionalize," explained the secretary, "but to support initiatives like yours that offer a family environment for these children." The financial help, although modest, allowed us to plan expansions. Joseph, who had begun to dedicate more time to the project, drew plans for an annex on the adjacent land, property we were able to acquire with part of William's insurance money saved for eventual emergencies. It would be a simple but ample house, with rooms for 15 more children, study rooms, its own refectory. In September, while the annex construction advanced, I received a letter that would change the course of our lives again. It came from Miami, from a lady named Olivia Richards, William's mother. We believed she had died years before. William had always spoken of her in the past, but there it was, written in the trembling handwriting of an elderly person, a revealing letter. Olivia explained that she had lost contact with her son after he moved to the interior years ago. Later, seeking him, she learned of his death. Investigating, she discovered about his daughters and now, to her surprise, about her grandson Richard, son of the second union. "I am old and sick," she wrote. "Before departing, I would like to meet my grandchildren, the children of my only son." I showed the letter to the children. Marianne, as expected, was reticent. After all these years, why now? Elizabeth got excited about the possibility. "A grandmother! I've always wanted to have a grandmother on Dad's side." Richard, thoughtful, said only, "I want to know what my father was like as a child. She must have stories." I wrote to Olivia, inviting her to visit us. Weeks later, a frail lady with white hair and eyes identical to William's, and consequently to Richard's, descended at the bus station, leaning on a cane. I hosted her in the best room of the boarding house, trying to overcome the initial discomfort. That first night, after the children retired, we had a long conversation. Olivia revealed what not even William knew. She had been abandoned by her husband, William's father, when the boy was only 5 years old. To survive, she worked as a seamstress in family homes, leaving her son in boarding schools during the week. "He grew up with that wound," she explained, tears in her wrinkled eyes. "The abandonment by his father, his mother always absent, working. He always sought male approval, trying to overcome the ghost of the father he never knew. I don't excuse what he did to you and the girls, Jane, but it may help to understand." That conversation illuminated obscure angles of the story. It didn't justify William's choices, but offered context. The abandoned boy had become the man who abandons, repeating patterns, perpetuating cycles of pain. The difference, I pondered, is that we can choose to break these cycles. Our children would not carry this curse. Olivia remained with us for a month. She was a discreet but significant presence. She told stories of William as a boy to Richard, who absorbed every detail. She taught ancient embroidery points to Elizabeth, who incorporated them into her artistic creations. Even Marianne, initially distant, approached when discovering her grandmother's talent for numbers. Olivia had been an informal accountant for small merchants. On the eve of her departure, Olivia called me to the garden. "Jane, I know I have no right to ask anything, but I would like to return, to be present in their lives." I surprised myself by agreeing without hesitation. "The children deserve all possible affections, Olivia. You will always be welcome." In December, we officially inaugurated the flower shelter. The new building, annexed to the boarding house, would initially accommodate 15 children, with plans for future expansion. During the small ceremony, I observed our unlikely family constellation. Marianne, almost a woman, assisting with guided tours. Elizabeth, radiant with her paintings decorating the walls. Richard, serving snacks he had learned with Aurora. The first 5 children welcomed, already so different from the scared little ones who had arrived. Joseph and Anthony, practically part of the family. My longtime boarders, the seamstresses from the atelier, and even Olivia, who had returned especially for the occasion. "You've built a small miracle here," commented the mayor during his brief speech. I shook my head, correcting, "We built it. Every person present contributed. It was a collective effort." The year 1975 began agitated. Marianne had taken the entrance exam for civil engineering at the University of Illinois in Chicago, an extraordinary feat for a young woman from the interior, especially in a course dominated by men. Elizabeth was preparing to enter high school, divided between the desire to follow arts or medicine. "I want to both create beauty and heal," she explained. Richard, now in middle school, developed an interest in literature and history, dreaming of being a teacher. In March came the much-awaited news. Marianne had been accepted at the University of Illinois. Joy mixed with anxiety. My firstborn would leave the nest, would face the metropolis. "I'm prepared, Mom," she assured me with the confidence that always characterized her. "You taught me to fight for what I want." To my surprise, Olivia offered unexpected help. She owned a small apartment in Chicago where she had lived for years before moving to Miami. It was vacant, and she offered it to Marianne. "It will be safer than a dorm or boarding house," she argued, "and will help with expenses." Marianne accepted, overcoming old resistances. We prepared her move amid laughter and tears. On the eve of her departure, I found her contemplating the night city from her room window. "I'm afraid, Mom," she confessed, briefly abandoning the strong posture. What if I can't make it? What if they find out I'm a small-town girl? I hugged her, feeling her already woman body, remembering the baby I once cradled. You were never just anything, Marianne. You're the daughter of the woman who rebuilt life from zero. You have that strength inside you. The next morning, Joseph took us to the bus station in his car. The bus to Chicago would depart at 7. Marianne hugged each one at length. Elizabeth, Richard, Joseph, Anthony, Aurora. "Take care, daughter," was all I could say when my turn came. "And remember, you'll always have a home to return to." The following weeks brought new adjustments. Elizabeth assumed some of her sister's responsibilities at the boarding house. Richard became more independent. Joseph began to frequent our house almost daily, helping with the children at the shelter, who now numbered 12. In May, I received a proposal I never imagined. The local TV's Today's Woman program wanted to do a report on my trajectory. "The woman who transformed abandonment into an empire," said the headline exaggeratedly. I initially hesitated. I had never sought the spotlight. But the social workers who accompanied the shelter insisted that visibility would bring benefits. The report aired in June, showing the boarding house, the restaurant, the atelier, the shelter. It told my story in a simplified but honest way. The broken marriage, the struggle to start over, the welcoming of Richard, the creation of the shelter. The program received an enormous response, with letters from women in similar situations asking for advice, donations for the shelter, offers of volunteering. "You've become a celebrity," joked Richard after the broadcast. But what touched me most was Elizabeth's comment. "Now other women will know it's possible, Mom, that they're not alone, that something beautiful can be born from pain." The following years brought consolidation and growth. Marianne graduated with distinction, the first woman in her class, overcoming prejudices and obstacles. Elizabeth entered the College of Fine Arts, discovering in art therapy a way to unite her passions. Richard, after brilliant school performance, was accepted to study literature, determined to become a teacher. The shelter expanded again, thanks to donations and official recognition as an institution of public utility. A new annex was built in 1978, allowing us to serve 30 children. We implemented innovative methodologies with emphasis on integral development, artistic education, preparation for autonomy. Joseph and I, after years of unconventional relationship, formalized our union in 1979, not on paper, but in a symbolic ceremony in the Meadow House garden, surrounded by our extended families. "We don't need documents to prove what we've built," declared Joseph, always respectful of my hard-won independence. In January 1980, as I contemplated the photo albums that documented our journey throughout the decades, I received the news of Olivia's passing. She departed serenely in her apartment in Miami, after reconciling with her grandchildren and, in a way, with the complex memory of her son. In her will, she left the Chicago apartment to the 3 grandchildren in equal parts, her last gesture of reparation for wounds she didn't cause but inherited as part of her own history. In the summer of 1980, we organized the first reunion of ex-residents of Flower Shelter, children who had passed through our institution and now followed their independent lives. It was an emotional celebration, with teenagers and young adults returning to share achievements, challenges, memories. Joaquin, the frightened boy who had arrived at 7 years old, now 13, solemnly declared, "When I grow up, I want to do for others what Mrs. Sanders did for us, show that family isn't just about blood." In August of that year, sitting in the garden of the boarding house, now full of roses, geraniums, and sunflowers that I cultivated with pleasure, I reflected on the incredible journey that life had provided me. The young clerk in love with the elegant banker had given way to a 43-year-old woman, a businesswoman, mother to biological and adopted children, heart grandmother to dozens of children who had passed through the shelter. The scars remained, marks of abandonment, struggle, losses. But as I told the children we welcomed, scars are medals of survival. Each mark told a story, witnessed a battle won, reminded us that we are stronger than we imagine. That golden afternoon of 1980, surrounded by the bustle of children playing, boarders talking on the porch, the aroma of fresh bread coming from the restaurant kitchen, I felt a deep gratitude, not for the abandonment, the betrayal, the nights of tears, but for the strength I discovered in the ashes, for the community I built from the ruins, for the beauty that flourished in seemingly barren soil. It's this strength I recall today, at 83, when young people like you ask me about my story. How did you manage it? They ask, amazed at the obstacles I faced in an era when divorced women were social pariahs, when being a woman entrepreneur seemed impossible, when raising children alone was seen as a sentence of failure. The answer is simple, although the path was complex. One step at a time, one day after another, with the certainty that the end of one dream doesn't mean the end of all dreams, and mainly, with the understanding that our greatest wounds can become our greatest gifts if used to generate empathy instead of bitterness, to build instead of destroy. Today, Meadow House, Southern Comfort Restaurant, the Atelier, and the Flower Shelter continue active, administered by a board that includes my children, former shelter residents, and community members. Joseph departed 5 years ago, peacefully during sleep, after a life full of affection and achievements. My children followed their paths. Marianne became a renowned engineer, specializing in affordable housing. Elizabeth is an internationally recognized art therapist. Richard is a university professor, dedicated to American literature. In 2015, the City Hall named a square after me, Jane Sanders Square, with a plaque that describes me as a visionary social entrepreneur, example of resilience. It's an honor, of course, but my true legacy isn't in plaques or tributes. It's in the eyes of each child who passed through the shelter and found their way. It's in the woman who found courage to leave an abusive relationship, inspired by my story. It's in the enterprises that generate jobs and dignity, in lives transformed by the simple act of believing that a new beginning is always possible. For you who are listening to me now, I leave these words. Don't be afraid of the ashes. The fire that seems to destroy everything can, in fact, be the beginning of something new and more beautiful. From the ashes, the most surprising flowers are born, those that no one expected, those that defy the logic of destruction and witness the regenerative power of life. My name is Jane Olivia Sanders. I was a wife, I was abandoned, I was judged. But that was just the beginning of my story, not its end. What came after? The woman I discovered in myself, the strength I didn't know I possessed, the love that allowed me to welcome even the son of betrayal. That's what defines who I am. Not what was done to me, but what I chose to do from that point. And that, my dear, is the true story of how love that turned to ashes was reborn as an entire garden. If you were moved by my story, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and like the video. Until next time, my dears.